All right. Oops. There we go. All right. I was like, oops, sorry, I forgot to turn on the other thing. Hey, everybody, I'm back. All right. So, wow, I needed to I know I'm way late. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it in time. I don't know if I'm going to make it in time. All right. So, it's time for our study group. So for those of you who have not been following along, we're actually in Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And let me get myself situated here while y'all are just kind of piling in here. So for those of you who haven't been following along, Neil Donald Walsh is a man who was struggling with life and with God and all of these other things. And he just got tired one day and was like, that's it. And he had a bitch fit and he went off and just started expressing himself to God in a way, and just airing out all his frustrations. And at some point, I'm trying to find my little light. Where's my light at? There it is. At some point he got a response back, and it was from God. And so it began a conversation or dialogue, which we now it's called Conversations with God. So it's a really good series. I love it. There we go. Yay. Perfect. Okay. Oh, I'm trying to come here. So what we're doing is we're going through the book and we're reading passages and chapters out of the book. And so what I do is I basically switch voices. One moment I'm speaking as Neil, and then I let you know when I'm speaking as Neil. And then the next moment I'm speaking as God, responding to the question that Neil asked. So we kind of cover different topics and different issues every single time we do this. I love this book. It's really, really informative. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to read through it. For those of you following along, if you want to participate, feel free to post some comments about the content, whether you're asking me a question about it or you're wondering something about the content itself. Any free readings, guys, if anybody's tuning in for free readings, that was an hour and a half ago. So this is all study group time, okay? All right, so let's get started here. So we're in chapter 8 of Conversations with God on the first book, and I'm on page 108. And this is the big book. I don't know if it's the same number in the small book, but this is the big book. By the way, guys, I'm curious, for those of you who were tuning in the last, when I was on live a little while ago, so I started losing all my energy, my energy just dropped, it plummeted, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And I thought maybe I just I've done too much today or whatever. And we were on the trail, and I was even thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder, because I know that sometimes when there's something that comes up or something happens publicly and there's a lot of emotional reaction by people or whatever, I know I get tired or I get drained usually a day or two or a couple of days before. So I was like, I wonder if something's coming. And I was like, no, I don't think so. But then my partner mentioned, he was like, I've been feeling dread today. I'm like, dread? I felt weird too. I was towards the end of my session, I started feeling all this knottiness in my stomach, knots. And then I started to lose my energy, and it was dropping. And I was like, what's going on? So I'm curious if anybody else has been feeling weird today, different than usual. Most people feel tired, right? I'm talking about tired, out of the ordinary tired or exhausted. So if any of you have, shoot me a comment because I'm curious. But I think it was just me, but we'll see. Okay, chapter 8. So, Neil, when will I learn enough about relationships to be able to have them go smoothly? Is there a way to be happy in relationships? Must they be constantly challenging? God, you have nothing to learn about relationships. You have only to demonstrate what you already know. There is a way to be happy in relationships, and that is to use relationships for their intended purpose, not the purpose you have designed. Relationships are constantly challenging, constantly calling you to create, express, and experience higher and higher aspects of yourself, grander and grander visions of yourself, ever more magnificent versions of yourself. Nowhere can you do this more immediately, impactfully, and immaculately than in relationships. In fact, without relationships, you cannot do it at all. It is only through your relationship with other people, places, and events that you can even exist as a knowable quantity, as an identifiable something in the universe. Remember, absent everything else, you are not. You only are what you are relative to another thing that is not. That is how it is in the world of the relative, as opposed to the world of the absolute, where I reside. Once you clearly understand this, once you deeply grasp it, then you intuitively bless each and every experience, all human encounter, and especially personal human relationships, for you see them as constructive in the highest sense. You see that they can be used, must be used, are being used, whether you want them to be or not, to construct who you really are. That construction can be a magnificent creation of your own conscious design, or a strictly happenstance configuration. You can choose to be a person who has resulted simply from what has happened, or from what you've chosen to be and do about what has happened. It is in the latter form that creation of self becomes conscious. It is in the second experience that self becomes realized. Bless, therefore, every relationship and hold each as special and formative of who you are, and now choose to be. Now your inquiry has to do with individual human relationships of the romantic sort, and I understand that. So let me address myself specifically and at length to human love relationships, these things which continue to give you such trouble. When human love relationships fail, relationships never truly fail except in the strictly human sense that they did not produce what you want. They fail because they were entered into for the wrong reason. Wrong, of course, is a relative term meaning something measured against that which is right, whatever that is. It would be more accurate in your language to say relationships fail, change most often when they are entered into for reasons not wholly beneficial or conducive to their survival. Most people enter into relationships with an eye toward what they can get out of them, rather than what they can put into them. The purpose of a relationship is to decide what part of yourself you'd like to see show up, not what part of another you can capture and hold. There can be only one purpose for relationships and for all of life, to be and to decide who you really are. It is very romantic to say that you were nothing until that special other came along, but it is not true. Worse, it puts an incredible pressure on the other to be all sorts of things he or she is not wanting to let you down. Then they try very hard to be and do these things until they cannot anymore. They can no longer complete your picture of them. They can no longer fill the roles to which they have been assigned. Resentment builds. Anger follows. Finally, in order to save themselves and the relationship, these special others begin to reclaim their real selves, acting more in accordance with who they really are. It is about this time that you say they've really changed. It is very romantic to say that now that your special other has entered your life, you feel complete. Yet the purpose of relationship is not to have another who might complete you, but to have another with whom you might share your completeness. Here is the paradox of all human relationships. You have no need for a particular other in order for you to experience fully who you are, and without another you are nothing. This is both the mystery and the wonder, the frustration and the joy of the human experience. It requires deep understanding and total willingness to live within this paradox in a way which makes sense. I observe that very few people do. Most of you enter your relationship forming years ripe with anticipation, full of sexual energy and a wide open heart, and a joyful, if eager, soul. Somewhere between 40 and 60, and for most it is sooner rather than later, you've given up on your grandest dream, set aside your highest hope, and settled for your lowest expectation or nothing at all. The problem is so basic, so simple, and yet so tragically misunderstood. Your grandest dream, your highest idea, and your fondest hope has had to do with your beloved other rather than your beloved self. The test of your relationships has had to do with how well the other lived up to your ideas and how well you saw yourself living up to his or hers. Yet the only true test has to do is what causes relationships to fail. What is the other being? What is the other doing? What is the other having? What is the other saying, wanting, demanding? What is the other thinking, expecting, planning? The master understands that it doesn't matter what the other is being, doing, having, saying, wanting, demanding. It doesn't matter what the other is thinking, expecting, planning. It only matters what you are being in relationship to that. The most loving person is the person who is self-centered. Let me go to another section. Neil, that is a radical teaching, God. Not if you look at it carefully. If you cannot love yourself, you cannot love another. Many people make the mistake of seeking love of self through love for another. Of course, they don't realize they are doing this. It is not a conscious effort. It's what's going on in the mind, deep in the mind, in what you call the subconscious. They think, if I can just love others, they will love me. Then I will be lovable, and I can love me. The reverse of this is that so many people hate themselves because they feel there is not another who loves them. This is a sickness. It's when people are truly lovesick, because the truth is other people do love them, but it doesn't matter. Now, no matter how many people profess their love for them, it is not enough. First, they don't believe you. They think you are trying to manipulate them, trying to get something. How could you love them for who they truly are? No, there must be some mistake. You must want something. Now, what do you want? They sit around trying to figure out how anyone could actually love them. So they don't believe you and embark on a campaign to make you prove it. You have to prove that you love them. To do this, they may ask you to start altering your behavior. Secondly, if they finally come to a place where they can believe you love them, they begin at once to worry about how long they can keep your love. So in order to hold onto your love, they start altering their behavior. Thus, two people literally lose themselves in a relationship. They get into the relationship hoping to find themselves, and they lose themselves instead. This losing of the self in a relationship is what causes most of the bitterness in such couplings. Two people join together in a partnership, hoping that the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts, only to find that it's less. They feel less than when they were single, less capable, less able, less exciting, less attractive, less joyful, less content. This is because they are less. They've given up most of who they are in order to be and to stay in their relationship. Relationships were never meant to be this way, yet this is how they are experienced by more people than you can even know. Why? Neil, why? God, it is because people have lost touch with, if they ever were in touch with, the purpose of relationships. When you lose sight of each other as sacred souls on a sacred journey, then you cannot see the purpose, the reason behind all relationships. The soul has come to the body, and the body to life, for the purpose of evolution. You are evolving, you are becoming, and you are using your relationship with everything to decide what you are becoming. This is the job you came here to do. This is the joy of creating self, of knowing self, of becoming consciously what you wish to be. It is what is meant by being self-conscious. You have brought yourself to the relative world so that you might have the tools with which to know and experience who you really are. Who you are is who you create yourself to be in relationship to all the rest of it. Your personal relationships are the most important elements in this process. Your personal relationships are therefore holy ground. They have virtually nothing to do with the other, yet because they involve another, they have everything to do with the other. This is the divine dichotomy. This is the closed circle. So it is not such a radical teaching to say, "Blessed are the self-centered, for they shall know God." It might not be a bad goal in your life to know the highest part of yourself and to stay centered in that. Your first relationship, therefore, must be with yourself. You must first learn to honor and cherish and love yourself. You must first see yourself as worthy before you can see another as worthy. You must first see yourself as blessed before you can see another as blessed. You must first know yourself to be holy before you can acknowledge holiness in another. If you put the cart before the horse, as most religions ask you to do, and acknowledge another as holy before you acknowledge yourself, you will one day resent it. If there is one thing none of you can tolerate, it is someone being holier than thou. Yet your religions force you to call others holier than thou. And so you do it for a while. Then you crucify them. You have crucified in one way or another all of my teachers, not just one, and you did so not because they were holier than thou, but because you made them out to be. My teachers have all come with the same message. Not I am holier than thou, but you are as holy as I am. This is the message you have not been able to hear. This is the truth you have not been able to accept. And this is why you can never truly, purely fall in love with another. You have never truly, purely fallen in love with yourself. And so I tell you this, be now and forever centered upon yourself. Look to see what you are doing, and having in any given moment, not what's going on with another. It is not in the action of another, but in your reaction that your salvation will be found. And I'm going to leave it there because that's a good stopping point. All right. Wow. This is pretty good. That was pretty good. So from experience, I know this to be true, just because this is something that I had to teach myself how to do as well. Because, growing up in my life, I didn't know my father. My father was not in the picture. I was a bastard child. So my father was married and my mother was his mistress. And so I didn't know my father. And the one opportunity I had to know him was, I think, my 7th birthday. I think it was my 7th birthday. And I waited all day for him to come because it would have been the first time I would have met him. And I was all excited and I was nervous and anxious, and because I was like, if he'll just meet me, if he'll just get to know me, he will love me. I know he'll love me. And I was trying to tell myself that I was worthy of his love. And then he called and made an excuse that he had a flat tire and he just bailed. And that was it. That was the end of my father in my life at all. Because I never met him. I never knew him. And in fact, when I was younger, there was a picture of him. It was a picture of him and my mom together, which is funny because my nose is like itchy as crazy. I knew him. I didn't know him. I saw that picture, and it's funny because he was short. My mom is short as well. They're both really, short people. Like my mom's like 5 foot or 4'8". Like she's really short, and my father was like around the same height, and I'm like 6'1". So there's like a huge difference there. So I don't know what that's about. And I've always wondered. I always told my mom, like, is my father because like I don't look like him, and I'm really tall in comparison to people in the family. So what's that all about? And she says like, no, like that's your dad. Like there was nobody else. I was like, okay. So he didn't want to be in my life, and he rejected me as a son. And so moving forward, every major male in my life, there was some sort of rejection that I experienced, except my grandfather, who was very accepting of me. But it was something that was built in. And so every time after I got old enough and I was looking for romantic relationships, I immediately was drawn and attracted to a type that was representative of value or worth, or a type that was representative of like that father energy, or that dominating energy. And I found myself drawn to people who were supposedly representative of those males in my life as well growing up, because in a way I was trying to prove to myself that I was worthy of love, and that I could have love, and that I was not a bad or evil person, or I wasn't something to be thrown away. I was trying to prove that to myself through the relationships. So I was very much like, whenever I would meet someone new, the first date, I would already start thinking about like the potential of marriage, or maybe this is the one, or this or that, right? And so I was always like caught in that cycle, and that became a norm. And it just happened with every single relationship. And I found myself, more involved with more guys over the years, but less relationships. Like I had dated, I had, spent time with people, etc., but I didn't have as many relationships. And not only that, but the relationships that stuck were always with people that were not my normal type. They were different type than my normal type. And they were representative of a completely different energy. But I would always find or make up reasons or excuses for like not continuing the relationship, because I was stuck on this type, or stuck on this, this expectation of what I was supposed to be with. So over time, I think, that became a norm or a trend for me, and it made me very obsessive about relationships. And I started to feel clingy. I started to feel all those things. It wasn't until my last major relationship, not my current relationship, but my last major relationship. And that was for about 4 years. So that was the second longest relationship I ever had. And that was with my ex. And like, that was just a crazy relationship to go through, because my ex was like the epitome of that figure in my life growing up as a child. And so even though my ex and the relationship went well for like the first 4 months, after that, the rest of the 4 years were a complete like drama nightmare. And so for me, I was like, why did I even stick to that relationship? Like, it went well for the first few months, but the first few months are when people are just being a version of themselves until reality sets in. And then that's when you start to really get to know somebody. And so my ex was definitely a cheater, and he would like to, he went off and would run around and stuff. And so for me, I was always trying to prove to myself, like, I'm good enough that you can only love me. You don't have to love everybody else. I'm good enough that it only has to be me. So I stuck with it, trying to prove that to myself, and trying to change this person, and trying to, become a version of them that they wanted me to become. And every time they had a comment, or they had a criticism of me, it would immediately start changing myself to fit the criticism, to make them happy, right? Because I was under the impression that happiness comes from the relationship. Happiness comes from being with someone. Happiness comes from being loved by someone. So after that relationship ended, I was done. Like I put myself through it, because I blame myself for that. I put myself through all of that. And I still wanted to have a life with somebody, or a relationship, or, but at the same time, I realized that I didn't love myself, and that I was putting myself and abusing myself by being in that relationship. And I completely lost myself in that relationship. And I didn't even recognize or know who I was when the relationship was over with. So once that ended, I went through kind of a reinvention of myself. It's one of my reinvention periods. I think it was like my second reinvention period. And I started to take a deep dive in myself. What's interesting is around that time, I also met my partner, because I only met my partner and we met like within a couple of weeks of that first relationship breaking up. And so within a couple of weeks, I met my partner, and we started talking at that time, but I was still working on myself and doing stuff for myself. And I had already committed myself to living my life for myself, not doing it for a relationship. But I still wanted a relationship. I still wanted partnership, or at least companionship. I think it's more about companionship. For me, when I think of relationships now, I think of companionship, because for me, that's the best word to use. And so partnership, I would say, is probably the next best word. I just don't like thinking of it as like my other half, or my, my twin flame or soulmate. Oh my God, I'm so sick of twin flame and soulmate. It's like ridiculous. I'm so sick of those words. But it wasn't my other half. We're not half of a person walking around. And I realized that going through that whole experience, I'm not half a person. This person never completed me. They never made me whole. They never made me fulfilled. And I thought I would get fulfilled once I made them happy, and then they loved me back. But that wasn't what ended up happening, and it would have probably never happened, because we did have periods where things were going well, and it would inevitably get back to a state of chaos. So with my current partner, when we first met, I knew that I needed to work on some stuff just within myself for me. And I also needed to stop letting myself be railroaded or just being like manipulated by other people if I were going to be in a relationship. So when we first got into my relationship with my partner, it was a very different dynamic, very different personality, and he represented the other energy, the energy of the types that I ended up having sustainable relationships with. So he represented that, and so I was like, I'm going to stick with this, and I'm going to work myself because I'm the issue. I'm the one that I have to work on to find a sense of happiness or just to have that sense of fulfillment. And in the first couple of years of our relationship, I remember sometimes taking issues that I had experienced from the past relationship and I would overshadow my new relationship with those issues. And it was as if my partner had become a target for my expression and my frustration over still working through old stuff. And so some of that I would overshadow him with it. And when I started to realize I was doing that, I immediately stopped. Cease and desist is what I did. And I decided I was going to let my partner be who my partner was and not hold him to this standard or expectation for what is a cultural and societal norm in our civilization. And so I was no longer going to treat my partner like this, like he was supposed to be this epitome or this version of what is supposed to be. And I just said, you know what? I'm letting you off the hook. You be who you want to be. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. I'm never going to expect anything other than just your love and also just, respect and treating each other in a healthy way. And that's it. And then we're just going to keep each other company. And it worked because we're going on 13 years, right? So it worked. And to this day, I don't really... My partner and I think we're a good fit in that we appreciate each other and we appreciate the companionship. We really do have a companionship. And though we're not ideal versions of what the other person would prefer, we still click, we still work. And I don't expect my partner to be anybody else other than who he wants to be. And I don't expect him to expect of me anything other than who I am. Whenever he wants more from me than what I expect from him, I call him out on it. I was like, nah, because I don't put you through that. I don't expect that from you, so I'm not going to give you that. Or that's just not, no, you need to get over yourself. So I will bring it up and I'll acknowledge it. But we still talk to each other. But we only have, we only argue maybe once or twice a month at the most, I think. So, and we were talking about this the other day. I was like, we don't argue very much. And he's like, no, maybe once or twice a month. So we'll get in each other's nerves or we'll argue once or twice a month. Granted, every now and then we irritate each other just because we're separate people. We're different people from each other. We do things differently. But that's no reason. I mean, irritability comes with every single relationship. I don't know of people who don't irritate each other in one way or another. So to hear about a relationship that's like that, I don't even want to hear it because I'm like, nope, that's not the norm. Y'all are freaks. Y'all are freaks of the relationship industry. That's not the norm. But happy for them, but that's not the norm that I've encountered, right? So let me go through here to see what y'all are. Got a troll here. This Temi, a deaf flow. That's a troll. So let me go here and see what questions you were asking about with the book content. Still readings. Still reading personal questions, e-readings. I resonate with this so much. Yeah, it's one of my go-to advice. That's my go-to advice for people, where once we really let other people off the hook and we go into relationships without all of this pressure and expectation, oh my God, does it make a world of difference. I keep telling people, I was like, had I been practicing when I was younger, what I practice today in mindset and behavior, I would have been a big whore because I wouldn't have wanted to settle down. I wouldn't have wanted to focus on one person. I would have instead traveled the world more. I would have had more adventures. I would have pushed myself to have more experiences that are less fixated or obsessed around relationships, around romance. It's love, that idea of love. Had I been then what I am now, I think I would have enjoyed my youth more. and appreciated more friendships and more connections. Because, at the end of the day, it's all about intimacy and connection with people. And sometimes people have intimacy. I'm spitting all over myself. Sometimes people have intimacy and connection with each other, but there's no intent for a relationship, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to turn an intimate, bonded connection or relationship into something serious or long-term. That you're not a bad person if you have that kind of a relationship with people. You're not an evil or bad person. That's a religious argument. That is not an ethical one. And so, no, it would, and we weren't born with, rings on our fingers. We were not born with, you're nothing until you're in a relationship and have kids. We weren't born with that tattooed on our asses. Like that's a cultural thing. That is not a human experience thing. And if we focus on just human relationships and having meaningful connections with other people, then we wouldn't have as much of the craziness as we have. But of course, people love the idea of love because it seems magical. And I understand why, because when we decided to come into this form as source into physical form, into human form, we tricked ourselves into believing, or we bought into the idea that we're not source anymore. We had to, in order for us to be in this form, we had to buy into the idea that we were not source, all love, all beingness, the accumulation of all things. We had to buy into that idea. So we had to trick ourselves and fall into that mindset. So when we got here, that's the mindset. But there's a deeper part of us that longs and desires and remembers. And it is a part of us that is from within reaching out to try to remember, try to reclaim some of that love, some of that grandness of beingness and connection with all things, as source, as grand source. So we reach out to each other, trying to supplement that element, supplement that thing. But it isn't, that's not the only way to experience it. You can experience it by remembering who you are and what you are here, and remembering the value that you have, and remembering that you're not the conditioning of your life circumstances or the title that you've been given either by society or by yourself out of hatred. You are love, you are all beingness, and you are worthy of all that you desire and all that you wish for. You're worthy of all that, and you don't have to wait for love to receive or give yourself those things. And I think that's when I made the switch. I decided I was not going to wait for my partner to give me what I wanted, and I wasn't going to wait for a better relationship to give me what I wanted. I was just going to give it to myself. And as I began giving myself the things I desired for myself, including this career, including my home where I live, my lifestyle, including the experiences and friendships that I choose. Once I decided to, and I chose, and it became self-absorbed or self-centered, which is what they were talking about in the book. Once I embraced that, I was able to also love others just as much. When you're authentically self-centered in a loving way and nurturing way, you can't help but want to be that for everybody else as well, but in a way where it's not completely taking everything away from you, where you're going to have limits, or you can call yourself to a limit. Even if you want to give more, or you feel bad that you're not able to give more, you give as much as you can. It's like what happened earlier when all my energy, I just dropped all my energy, and I was like, okay, like I want to do more, I want to give more, but at the same time, like I know my limit, and at this point I'm at my limit, so I had to pull myself back from that. But that's what you do. You offer as much as you can, but then you learn your limits, and you don't destroy yourself in the process of giving to another. And no one should ever ask you to destroy yourself for them. If they do, that isn't love. That is manipulation. That is a tactic of control. That is a tactic of dominance that is rooted in conditioning. So let me go to here, because I wouldn't say go to here. Here we go. So let's go here. Okay, yeah, Cassidy's like, I had to switch from Facebook. It was lagging. I've been feeling that way all day today. I think she's talking about earlier when I said if anyone else is feeling drained today, because definitely was feeling that. And it's okay. Just sometimes it happens. No personal readings, peeps. We're only doing this study group. Yeah, Cassie says, I've always felt that every person that comes into our life is a teacher and leaves with us a bit of themselves that we absorb for better or worse. Absolutely, 100%. I 100%. Yeah, and Sarah's like, I completely agree. Yes, 100% hallelujah, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. That's true. I 100% agree with that, and I don't dispute that at all. Actually, every single person that's been in my life has taught me something. Once I looked past whatever the issue was that may have been a part of that. So like with my partner, we are two very different people, and sometimes he reacts to something completely different than how I would react. And what's interesting is I think I've become a lot more tolerant of people in their choice to handle or deal with things the way they want to, and not feeling pressure to have to change them or have to like improve their way of coping. Because I used to do that back. That was an issue that I had back at Starbucks when I was a manager. Whenever one of my partners, one of my employees would have issues at home or personal issues, I always wanted to try to help. And so sometimes I would go out of my way to help them outside of work. But it always ended up becoming this ongoing cycle where it started to become a trend and a regular event. And at that point, I'm like, okay, I can't keep doing that. I can't expose myself. Remember once, one of my partners, because I had already loaned my truck out to a couple of my, when you have a truck, by the way, guys, whenever you buy a truck, everybody and their mama wants to borrow your truck for moving stuff. That's like a thing. When you get a truck, automatically expect people to call you or ask you to borrow your truck because they want to move furniture or they want to move stuff. It's just a thing. And so when I had my truck, my employees, sometimes if they were moving or whatever, they would borrow my truck, and I had loaned out my truck various times. And then the last person that asked it, she was like, hey Ferny, can I borrow your truck? I'm moving and stuff like that. And I said, no, you can't borrow my truck. And she was like, what? Why? You let everybody else follow it? I'm like, that's exactly why, because I've let everybody borrow it and I'm putting a stop to it right now. So I'm sorry, but you have to be the example that I'm setting for everybody. But I can't loan you my truck. You can hate me all you want, but I have to take care of myself at this point. And so, and it comes down to taking care of myself or compromising myself to help you so that you're not angry with me or you're not upset with me. And I'm going to choose myself. And so that she was like, oh, but it's not like she hated me after that, but still, but you have to set the example. You have to set the example, but every single person that I've met in my life has taught me something. And this is why at this stage of my life, I'm a lot more patient and tolerant with people, around me, who I keep around me, who deal with things in a different way. And if someone is dealing with things in a way where it's very toxic or it's not healthy at all and it's like ongoing issue, it's one thing. Like you're allowed to like freak out and like be crazy like once every now and then, like every 10 years. But if you're crazy every single time something goes down, I don't need you in my life, because you're literally going to be, it's just too much. It's too much drama. I don't have the energy for having to counteract all of that. Like, no, it's one thing to act and react to stuff. It's another thing when you're just crazy all the time. Like you need to like come down to 0 from like 100. But for most people in my inner circle, I'm a lot more tolerant when they do have their freak out moments, or when they do have moments where they're really pushing, they're really struggling with stuff, because I've done a lot of good work of limiting how much of that I expose to myself. And I think that's another reason why I don't feel as attached to people in my life, because over the many years of working at Starbucks, etc., it's like a revolving door. People come in and people leave. People come in and people leave. And I remember in the very beginning, I used to be so sad, or I used to be so depressed, because people, I get used to people where I, be working with people who I really liked, and then life would take them elsewhere. And so it broke my heart, and it got my heart over and over again. I felt brokenhearted over and over again. And so I finally said, you know what? This is life. People come in and people go. People come in and people go. And that's okay. It is what it is. So I think today I'm a lot more aware of that, and I'm okay with that. Even now when people pass away, it doesn't really affect me on the same level. I think the closest people to me, that will affect me more, but because of the work that I do, and I'm so used to talking to them all the time. For me, it's a very real. They're real. They exist. So I don't question that anymore. I don't question what happens after we pass. I don't question how it feels to die, because I've gotten enough of them to know the whole MO. And then, my few times where I visited the other side, that has been fascinating for me to experience that. And I've only had a little taste of what it would be like. So for me, this work isn't so. It validates and it affirms, and it takes the fear away, and the feeling of like I will never have that connection with them, or I will lose them forever, or I don't have that anymore. For me, it's like, no, like everything's ebbs and flows, and there's tides, and then there's low tides and high tides in life, and that's okay. Like that's just life, and it's okay. Yeah, Sarah Sardis is like, I find with certain people that I know is that they have unrealistic expectations in people and relationships. I think a majority of us have been conditioned that way. Like there's all these unrealistic expectations, and I blame Hollywood for that. I blame like movies like The Notebook and all these like love stories, Pretty Woman. Oh my God, like as much as I love the movie Pretty Woman, like the idea that you need a man to take care of you and you're nothing without his money, like that's bullshit. And I'm just like, no, like everybody can have the same position. At this point, it should, I want to see more females taking care of the males. That's what I want to see. So I would rather see that than, a man having to take care of a woman. And so those are old mindsets, old ideas. I want my king. Like earlier, one of the clients was like, or one of the viewers was like, I'm ready for my king. And I'm just like, well, why does anybody have to be royalty, or why does he need to be a king? You can be the queen and you have a bodyguard, or you have somebody who's just there as a support. You don't have to be king and queen. It doesn't have to be equal. And if anything, a lot from the experience I've had, most of the relationships, real relationships that have been together for years, most of them are not equal. I've literally seen that over and over and over again in the client readings that I've done, where one person in the relationship is the more dominant person, the other one's more submissive, or the more like behind the scenes type of person. Rarely do I encounter these power couples or these like powerhouses where both of them are on the same page and they're both doing this and that. Like, no. And for me, that does happen, but you think it was like movie stars and etc., where two people who have been just as successful, how long do they last? Like that doesn't happen as often as people think, because two very dominating people and to people who have very much big ambitions, it's going to be hard for them to be able to maintain the level of intimacy and the level of closeness that usually comes along with one person being more of the dominant, like, career driven or ambitious person, while the other person's more of a submissive role, or they're more like to the back, or they're more just a nurturing position in that person's life. So that's like what it's like for me and my partner. Like I'm the more, it's funny because I've always wanted a relationship where I was the more submissive one and my partner was the dominating one. And that was what I had in the last relationship that went to hell in a handbasket. My current relationship, I'm definitely the more submissive. I'm definitely the more dominant person in the relationship. I'm the person who's like, okay, this is what we're doing, or this is what we're doing, or this is what we're doing. If something blows up, come to me. Like that, this is who I am in the relationship. And that's okay. I actually have enjoyed it quite a bit. And I never thought I would. I feel like I became the man that I wanted for myself when I was looking for love in relationship. So I feel like I became that man for myself. And so I no longer need it of anybody else. So my partner can just be him. He can just be whoever he wants to be. And companionship is all I really need from him. And even then I can be in my own little zone and be alone, and I want to be my own little bubble. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the expectations are coming down from all of our, from our families. Like, at this point, and I keep running into this over and over and over again, women who are 30 years old, who are not married, who don't have kids, who don't have a home and an established career are failures, according to all the women who are that age. And so the women who are like 45 or 48, or the people who are older, they keep comparing themselves and they start feeling like they're like way behind and they need to catch up, and they're comparing themselves to this norm. Like, what the hell is up with that? Like, who cares whether, you're a wealthy person or whether you're a person who can just take care of yourself and pay the bills? Who cares if you're, well known, or if you're just someone who is very passionate about the work? Like, who cares either or? Like, why don't you just do what you really want to do and not base the significance and the success of your life on what is culturally understood to be successful? Because that's changing. And actually the last two generations to roll out of, the youngins, they're all changing that reality. That's already becoming changed with them, because they no longer value the same things that my generation and the generation right behind me valued. So it's a very different scenario. Yes, Cassie's at a good point. Do you feel like the further we expand in our spiritual growth, the less we focus on relationship? Absolutely, because again, relationship is our way of understanding who we are and what we are. And so the only way that we can know who and what we are is by engaging with our circumstances. And so inanimate objects, that there's only so much we're going to gain from that. But when we're dealing with other people, there's different perspectives. And when you're dealing with different perspectives, you've got contrasting experiences, and you get to decide from what you're having with that person or what you're experiencing. Am I this, or am I not this? I am not this. Okay, then this is what I am. And so we start to formulate ourselves and figure ourselves out and get to know ourselves a lot better in that way. So yeah, the more spiritual we become, or the more spiritual expansive we become, those singular relationships don't have as much sway. You know, there's in my life right now, there is not one individual that I feel I have to depend on to feel connected to on a consistent, regular basis, besides like my mama cat, my cats, and my partner, just because they're a part of my everyday life. And I definitely would feel it if they weren't there. But everybody else in my life who I absolutely love, my family, etc., I can go weeks without talking to them, sometimes months. And then when I pick up the phone, it's like no time has happened. No time has gone by. And we're just picking up right where we left off. And I like those kinds of relationships. Those relationships actually work for me. And it was really hard for my sister because my sister wants to have a relationship and family where we're like best friends for each other and we're texting each other every day and we're keeping ourselves up to date and everything, which is fine. I mean, some people have that kind of relationship. That's not who I am though. And so when she kept trying to do that, and I had to explain to her, look, I love you. Don't think that I'm rejecting you or I don't want to have a relationship with you. I'm not needing of that ongoing, regular, consistent, like I have to check in with you every few hours. I don't need that. And I'm okay without it. And I don't feel that I love you less because I don't need that from you. In fact, I feel I love you more because I don't need anything from you. I choose to still be in your life as your brother. I choose to still be a part of your life. And as long as I am able to connect with you in a meaningful way a few times a year, I'm fine with that. And I actually appreciate our time more because it's not, to me, it's not diluted by the drama that sometimes comes along with having family and with being that involved in family stuff. So for me, it works better that way. So in my life, I don't really need to interact with people as often. I have people that I connect with on a regular basis, but honestly, like that's very few. Most people I talk to every few weeks, every few days, whatever. And it isn't for me a big thing. I don't get butthurt if I haven't heard from somebody in 6 months. It doesn't bother me because I still love them. And no matter what, nothing changes that I love them. If they haven't talked to me for 6 months, maybe they're busy. Maybe something's going on. Maybe they're focused on whatever they want to focus on. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to love them any less. So. Sarah, I understand that you have to love yourself before you can love another, but sometimes it takes that one special person that helps you learn to love yourself and feel worthy. Yeah, sometimes it does. Sometimes it definitely can be helpful. I think I was that for my partner because I remember when we first got together, and I was like, where do you want to go? Or what do you want to do? And I pick him up, right? And he's like, well, whatever you decide, I will go with. Whatever, you can make a decision, whatever you decide. And I was like, oh, no. I was like, oh, no. That was like in the first couple of dates. I was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be where you're not allowed to have an opinion or have a say on anything. We're not going to play that game. I'm open, but I have preferences. You have preferences. Share with me what your preferences are, and then maybe we can find something that'll work for both of us. But we're not going to do that. Like all that I want is what matters, and then you don't get any say, or you don't at least you can't have an opinion. So we're not going to do that. And so I think in that, and then also, I think because he had gone through so many heartbreaks that in the beginning of our relationship, he didn't really believe he would ever fall in love again or he would ever have real love. He had a first love, but it wasn't a healthy one. And so he was just, at that point, he was just, talking and chatting. We met on like gay.com, which was it was a chat room. It was a chat room online. It's almost like current, like the apps that we have now where you can date, but this was like a chat room back when people were still doing chat rooms and you can see all of the people scrolling through and stuff. And then you can private message somebody. So I remember, I was like, no, like we're not going to do that. And I think it was hard for me at first because he kept thinking that I wasn't going to stick around or I wasn't going to stay. And he kept saying, and I kept saying, hey, I love you, and he was like, we'll see. That was his response in the beginning. Like I literally had to talk him into going on a date for a month. I literally tried for a month to get him to go on a date with me. And he kept trying to talk me out of going on a date. I wish I would have listened to him because I was like, I really would have listened to him, but no, I had to talk him into it. And, he finally said yes. And then we started to go out and date. And I was like, I love you. And after a while, you start sharing your feelings. And he was like, we'll see, we'll see. And I was like, what do you mean we'll see? And I had such a big issue with that in the beginning because I'm like, I'm telling you my feelings and you're dismissing them as if they're not real, but if they're real to me. And his mom did the same thing to me too as well. I remember the first time I met her, I came over to their house and I, introduced myself or whatever. She was very standoffish. And I think it's because he had gone through so many heartbreaks that she didn't expect him to bring anybody home that was worthy, that was worth anything. And that they would all just, they would make promises and then they would never keep their promises. They would always bail or something would happen. And so I remember the first time I met her, it wasn't really like a cordial kind of meeting. She wasn't having it. And so I was like, just making small talk or whatever and telling her about my life and all this other stuff. And then she says, yeah, whatever. She says, look, he's already been hurt. He's already been hurt. People have come into his life and have hurt him. And I don't want to see him hurt again. And I'm tired of getting hurt. And, because he had one relationship that did last a while, but they had fallen out of love with each other. And so his mom, she had gotten used to that person. And so now that they were gone, that was like the standard for her. And she was like, I don't want to see him get hurt by anybody else. So why should I trust you? Why should I trust you? You sound good. Everything you say is good. But that just is what I want to hear. Why should I even trust you or give you any of the time and to even believe anything that you have to say? And I said, well, then you can't. I said, you can't trust me. You can't believe anything I have to say. You're just going to have to wait and see. And I don't think she was expecting that response. I think she was expecting me to no, trust me. Like, I'm going to be around. Trust me. I'm not going anywhere. No, I was like, oh yeah, at this point, you don't even want to hear what I have to say. And I'm not even going to try to convince you of anything. So I literally just flat out told her, you're just going to have to see. You're just going to have to wait and see. And it's either going to work or it ain't. But I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you of anything. You're just going to have to see. And that was it. And so here we are 13 years later. So, and we talk about that now. To this day, we talk about it. We joke about it because I always make fun of her. Like, yeah, you were trying to beat me up the first time I met you. And she thinks it's so funny. Oh. Yeah, Cassidy says, do you remember in Sylvia's books how she talked about how we merge souls instead of physical intimacy on the other side? I think about that often. Yeah, so she's talking about Sylvia Brown's book. So there's in one of Sylvia Brown's books, she talks about the heavenly state and all these other things. And one of the things she talks about is our soul being, that there's a level of connection within souls where they can come together, and this is not like sex. This is like a merging of the energy, and it's almost like one energy. I remember reading about that. What I've been told by Aja, and what they used for me, there's actually in Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, which is one of the shows, one of my favorites. There's a character in the show. His name is Odo, and Odo is a species of race where he's he's liquid. All he is liquid, but he can control what he looks like. So it's like a shapeshifter. And his entire race is the same. And they exist on a planet, and when they connect with each other, they merge energies, and it's almost as if they can know each other's experience, and they share with each other in this way. So when I asked Aja about it, that's what Aja told me, it's a lot more like that, except there isn't a physicality to it. It's just an idea of merging of ideas or merging of thoughts or merging of perspectives. It's what it is. So in other words, if we think of ourselves, because whenever when we think of the afterlife, people love to make it physical. It's not physical. This is physical. We're in the only physical place in our reality. So this is physical. This is the physicality of it. When we're in spirit form, it's more solid than the physical, because it's held together by the knowingness of being of God. It's held together in solid, in a very solid way, but not in a physical way. It's a solid structural beingness, but it's not physical. That's a really tricky thing for people to understand. So when you are in that form and you are connecting with others as well, it's honestly like it's kind of like clouds. You know, when you see clouds and you see two clouds going by, sometimes when they get close enough to each other, they kind of mesh, or they kind of become one, and sometimes they splinter off into others. It's kind of like that in a way, where we can kind of merge and bond, and we're experiencing certain things within that momentary alliance of knowingness in that perspective, and then from that splinters off other ideas, other potentials, other forms of creation. So it's an interesting really thing. It's almost like baby souls, but it's not necessarily a baby soul. It's an idea of a perspective that didn't exist before, because of the merging of ideas and thoughts that produce new potentials. That's what that is. So it's a lot like that. Oh, thank you, JR's mama. Thank you. I appreciate that. She's like, when I always had a truck, always moving. I see you have a lot of books and enjoy reading. I'm wondering if you have any reading suggestions or any certain book that inspired you other than The Secret. The Secret, to me, The Secret is like fast food. That's what I think of The Secret. For me, like Conversations with God, the Course in Miracles, one of my favorites, Ask and It Is Given by Jerry and Esther Hicks. The raw material is pretty interesting as well. One of my favorites was the Seth material. The Seth Speaks. Seth Speaks was one of my favorite earlier books, because it is so, it's like Conversations with God, but it's like it's a little more complex. But I love it. And it touches on different topics and so forth. So Seth is one of my favorites as well. I have so many. The Secret is actually not like on the top of my list. It's on the top of my list for referrals to people, because most people don't even know that. It's almost like when someone's starving and they need to eat something, and they need to eat something fast. Instead of teaching them about nutrition and about cooking and how to mix foods together, I just say, hey, stop at that McDonald's because they have some food there for you. Oh my God, it's so easy. It's so easy. So The Secret's like a fast food version of manifestational work, of really getting aligned and beginning to take control of the creative process with source in form. That's what I think of when I think of the Secret, is like a fast food version of that. So The Secret is just like a simple an easy end, but it's way more complicated than that. And there's a lot more to it than that. But that's just a start. For me, I give that to people so that they can open their minds, and then we can start to move them in a different direction that will give them better awareness and understanding of self. But Seth Speaks is a really good series in my mind. I actually used to read when I used to ride the bus home from Starbucks back when I was a barista. I used to read Seth Speaks while on the bus every day. I read it, and I would get dizzy, like, because when you're reading on the bus, you're like doing this, and your eyes are like constantly moving, and it makes you want to throw up. After all, I was like, okay, I'm gonna put this down because I gotta throw up. 1810s, it says, but what if you feel happy loving others? Is that some form of self-love, as in if loving someone else makes you happy? So I love loving others. I love loving myself just as much. There's literally in my mind, no separation between how much I love myself and how much I love others. And I exemplify that in my closest relationships, because, they're just expansions and expressions and reflections of the mass. But I love others just as much as I love myself. I have to take care of myself so that I can serve what I'm here to do, to serve my mission. Loving others and not loving yourself is definitely not a balance. It's not a balance, and it's not really the route to go. If you can't love yourself as much as you love others, then at that point, when you love others, then what tends to happen is there's something that you're still needing back from it, whether it's acknowledgement that you did that, whether it's feeling sometimes special because you're highlighting yourself, or you're making yourself out to be something different, or because you get approval. You get approval from others. So it just depends. But you can love others. I love others all the time. I mean, that doesn't mean I have to be in a relationship where I only love the person I'm with, but they don't love me back. That's a completely different situation. That's a very twisted way of trying to feel like you're in a relationship, if it's like a romantic relationship. All right, so I think that's it for that, and I think I'm at the end of it, so... Okay, so those are personal questions. All right, guys, so that's it. All right, guys, I love you all. Thanks for tuning in for the study group. We will be back on Wednesday for our normal study group time. And so after the first book of the series for this, I'm going to go ahead and switch gears and do another book and take a break from the Conversations with God just because it's so big. And then we'll come back to it again. So, all right, guys, I love you all. I hope you have a happy weekend. And for those of you who celebrate Easter, happy Easter as well. And wish